carefully to my accent, which is strange. When I go to the bank in Georgia, I say, "What's that funny accent you have? Where are you from?" "I'm from Alabama." Guys are very generous. Smiles. I did some music in a Methodist church. I had 200 Methodists falling around when I said that. They thought so incongruous, that I would be from Alabama. So one lady in the bank said, "What part of Alabama are you from?" She hadn't been out of Fayetteville that one. So language is a fun thing, isn't it? That's a marvelous variety of ways of speaking the same language. I mean, if I walk in and tell you that I'm mad about my flat, what are you hearing? Sweating it out on the side of the road, changing a tire, yes? I didn't say that. Nothing at all. What did I actually say? Yeah, excited about my partner. I'm excited about my new partner. I'm mad about my flat. Jane and John have just broken up. In America, that's the end of a relationship. In England, that's the end of the school term. So be careful when you're translating. If you're translating the Bible at any point, sometimes a literal translation is a disaster. I'm pulling your leg. Looks like I can do it in Japanese. Not good. It means nothing. John 17:5. Glorify me with the glory I had with you, Father. Think about that. In English, that's quite clear. And you are academics, you're thinkers, you're the elite who lead the world of thinking. Very privileged, by the way, to be in this magnificent place. It's quite remarkable. So you think about language, think about the meaning of words. A lot of fog words, especially in religion, fog words. Pre-existence. You ever thought about it? How do you pre-exist yourself? You ever thought about it? It's easy with some of these ideas. Anyway, we're talking about ethics here. Your ethics class. And I'm doing this from a very narrow perspective. I'm not an expert on Aquinas or Augustinian theories of just war. I vaguely know what that is. I've been reading about that. But you should be aware of the ethics of Jesus in terms of what he said about war. And I'm doing this rather tentatively. I think what I'm saying is true. But you're not obliged to agree with anybody. Check it out. I come from a background where we were taught that life is a problem to be solved. Grandfather was physician at King George V and VI. You've seen the movie King's Speech? Somebody seen that? That was not literally, but grandfather was attending the death of Edward VIII, I think, before Bertie came in with his speech impediment. You've seen the movie. It's a marvelous movie, by the way. I know nothing about the movie, but the King's Speech. Bertie, that's the present Queen's father, had a speech impediment. Terrible stutter, couldn't get it out. And he was supposed to address the nation in the Second World War. So there's this speech therapist running him through the routine of speaking better. So Granddad then was Reed's professor of medicine at Oxford. Figured things out. He said, I remember very little of grandfather. Your grandfather's rather frightening figure sometimes. He was rather quiet and threatening. I knew him, I was probably 4 or 5 years old. He died when I was 13. And he said that we ought to eat much less than we do. That's his seasoned thesis after all of that medical work. Prevention is the key. What you eat is creating your health. I think a lot of truth in that. In America, I would have to say this is by, on the side, you're terribly medicalized, right? I hear these stories of grandmother who was taking 19 pills. We decided to take her off 16 of them. Guess what? He's feeling like a reaper. I'm exaggerating. So that's what I learned from grandfather. Dad was director of naval intelligence, and so his job was to figure out how do we defeat the Russians? How do we know how many ships the Russians have? How do we stop the Arabs from killing the Jews? So I was brought up in that environment, and so when one was taught, we're very much the product of our own parents. We are. You all are. Images of your own parents. So I'm coming at this now as a Bible scholar, so to speak, translating the New Testament currently. That's no big deal. If you work at this, not a big deal. If you work at this as a job for 35 years in a Bible college, as I did, before that I taught in your American school in London, languages, French and German. I was going to be a musician. I'm extremely bad in history, geography, don't know anything about mathematics, but I was rather fluent in language, easy with words. It's just a word game. So wound up then in a Bible college teaching Hebrew and Greek, those things. So I'm giving you what I've seen in 78 years. All of us, and you find as you go through your careers, unless you're totally stupid, you do learn something watching what you do. Isn't that interesting? If you do a job every day, day in, day out, you're likely to observe something about what you've seen. I feel at 78 I'm about ready to start. I really mean that. I've seen religion in all of its forms. I'm an expert on SDAs. What's that? SDAs, Seventh-day Adventists. I've got a job, by the way. If you know all these answers, then tell me something I don't know. I've still got a job. You know that. There we go. Seventh-day Adventist. C of E, what's that? Church of England. RC, Roman Catholic. UPC, United Pentecostal Church. Now, if I step on any toes here, forgive me. This is a university. What I'm against is killing people over doctrinal differences. I'm against that. You're going to see my point here. And the other class where we talked about the Anabaptists who were murdered for their theological views. And one of my sayings that I think makes a point is that religion done wrong is worse than atheism. It's very cruel. It's horrible. So I'm an observer of the religious scene. I feel I've emailed a million emails, I'm sure. I do this in my retirement. Fascinating. How are people configuring life? And how are they working this out in relation to God, church attendance, and all of that? America is particularly interesting because in England, nobody goes to church, practically. 2% of Brits go to church in those huge cathedrals in London. They only go to be hatched, matched, and dispatched. My Puerto Rican friend get that. That is it. You see it. She's a university brilliant person. She got that. Despite that not being your native tongue is not English. Am I right? Oh, that's a talent. See how valuable it is? To have two languages is valuable. Just talking to the French teacher, one French teacher here, he's completely bilingual. Fluency in English is equal to it's a very useful talent. And you can make money doing that. Anyway, in England, nobody goes to church, so they go to be hatched, matched, and dispatched. Come to America, and everything's a Bible bookstore or a Christian radio. It's incredibly bad. You're either very gullible or very religious, whatever it is. Isn't that amazing? You're flocking into church with your Bibles. So I make this point that sometimes this is not done with a great deal of thinking. For example, I can make little old ladies so mad in Georgia if I tell them that Jesus turned 120 gallons of water into alcohol. I don't care about the alcohol. It's not about, but the idiocy. Come on, let's think. You're the younger, bright, brilliant generation. Let's do a little bit more thinking with our religion. Let's think about, is the Pope really infallible? He says, from ex cathedra, he speaks infallibly. Think about that. Is that really true? I mean, you need to investigate, think about it all. Because you're going to teach your children something by way of faith or no faith, whatever it is you come. So in England, then, people do not go to church. Here, everybody goes to church. And so you've been discussing ethics. I don't know how many of you, we won't have a show of hands, we don't do that. Some of you are churchgoers. You read the Bible, you sort of think Jesus is a good idea. Some people think Jesus is nice, but not very smart. More of that is more than that. Jesus is nice, but not very smart. For me, Jesus is a rabbi. He's a teacher. He's a prof, actually. His teaching is everything. So if you ever get into New Testament studies, Jesus was a Jew and also a rabbi. And we'll do more of that tomorrow night, my observation on all that. But for the moment, you're looking at ethics, and you've been discussing what? Aristotelian ethics, Aquinas ethics. I don't know much about that. I'm going to suggest to you one way of doing ethics in the New Testament. This is a very narrow thing. I'm a naive, Bible-believing person. And I'm looking at Jesus' approach to war and peace. That's what our professor here asked us to do. And so I went back to school in my 40s or 50s. I wasn't the oldest at all in the class. There were lots of people getting their degrees in their 60s, 70s. And the school I went to was the Church of the Brethren. It's up here north now. I used to be in Chicago. And these people are kind of Mennonites. You know, if I say Mennonite, does that mean anything to you? Amish Mennonite people. They tend to be pacifists, conscientious objectives. They don't think you should kill your enemy. So I'm looking at that point of view and exploring something that you'll be thinking about. We had a dear friend, Adam, was in the last class, and he's been a Marine. And he said every Marine out there in Iraq, where he was, thinks about this almost constantly. What am I doing here? I get my legs blown off. I just shot somebody dead. There's some cost to that. So how do we deal with that? What did Jesus say? And I took then this point of view, and I'll just summarize the idea. It is simply this, that apparently in the New Testament, the historical Jesus, who I believe to be raised from the dead, I believe he's alive, seems to be very uncompromised. And he says something very radical, like love your enemy. So you face the question, you ponder this in your life. Some of you are military family. Anybody military family here? You are, okay. So your dad's talked about these things, I'm sure. Maybe you can hear more from them. My dad was Navy, so he struggled with this all of his life. What is meant then by loving your enemy? It's an interesting concept. Can you shoot your enemy and love him? These are the questions. Augustine said, you can shoot your enemy and love him. I'm not sure. You may convince me. I may change my mind this day. You may come up with something I never thought of. I'm still learning, I hope. But for the moment, I think the challenge of New Testament ethics in relation to war is quite interesting. You won't go through life without thinking about that, shortly. So what I did when I wrote my paper back in Bethany Seminary, that's the Church of the Brethren, which I had nothing to do. I went there to get my Master's in Theology, first degrees in language, and went into theology, finding that more fascinating than languages. And so I thought, how can I make my point? And they were all conscientious objectors, Mennonite types, right? They didn't think that killing enemies was okay. That was their position, right? They were wrong. So I thought, how can I make my point at its most extreme? And my solution was, and I'm going to read you some of the quotes I have in my paper, put the up there as well, was that Christians killing Christians sounds wrong. It has the wrong ring. And you can argue, well, Christians killing non-Christian enemies, that's perhaps slightly different, perhaps. But Christians killing Christians has a wrong ring to me. That might be decisive. So that's my point. I'm going to give you some quotes from people who try to make that point. Start with the Mennonites who said, a reasonable proposal for peace, the Mennonites said on a card, or on a postcard, a reasonable proposal for peace, that Christians agree never to kill other Christians. It's interesting. That has some simple validity for me, right or wrong. And you'll come up with, wait a minute, what to prevent people from killing, and all that. I mean, I see all that. I certainly admire people going to Iraq, risking being burned to pieces. I admire that courage. But if you're dealing strictly with Jesus and ethics, I'm not sure that he did that. So let's explore that for a few minutes, and then you come up with your points of view as well. It's an interesting subject. Dad wrestled with that, and Dad was an admiral in the Navy, and he was sympathetic to some of these views, not exactly agreeing with them, but you could see that the Quakers had a point. Didn't entirely agree with it. So in our childhood, we had these bishops come to the house, and they were all talking about these issues endlessly. What do you do if somebody attacks you in a foreign country? Are you going to drop an H-bomb on them? Some people became nuclear pacifists. You should be aware of that, right? People who otherwise were not conscientious objectors. They said, now it comes to massive, indiscriminate killing. Now the pacifist. Got it? So people have struggled with these things. And you, as educated people, at least must think about it. So in this essay, I called it Toward the Cessation of Church Suicide. I thought my strongest point, when you're writing your papers, don't you think, what's my decisive argument for that? The best I could think of, and I got good grade from the problem. They were, of course, sympathetic with this point of view. Towards the Cessation of Church Suicide, a theology of peace from an Anabaptist. What's an Anabaptist? Well, if you're taking the history of religions, you know the monolithic Roman Catholic Church, the magisterial Protestant, Calvin, Luther thing. And the Anabaptists were the radicals, saying, we don't like either of those things. You're with that, right? Which produces your Mennonites and your Church of God of the Brethren. The Anabaptist says, we don't like the idea of baptizing infants. That makes no sense to us at all. Surely an infant should know what it's going to do. You see that? And they took the very challenging step of saying, we don't believe the state baptism, the state church is right. That could cost them their lives. We did that in the other class. It's a tragic, tragic story of religion being exceedingly cruel. Michael Servetus, particularly in Carlos Schurter's piece on Michael Servetus, who was murdered by John Calvin. A book that you should try to read is called The Jesus Wars. You had it up there, isn't that right? Yeah. Jesus Wars. The Jesus Wars by Jenkins is interesting. Titled something like How Two Church Fathers, Three Emperors, and Two Other People decided what you should believe forever. Quite interesting. You are, whether you like it or not, under the grip of a lot of stuff that was decided post-New Testament by various leaders. So as educators, as thinkers, as analysts, you should be aware of that as you go through life. Okay, theology of peace from an Anabaptist point of view. My point was simply, Christians killing each other doesn't have the ring of truth. And you'll come up with lots of reasons, why if somebody's attacking in your home and you're defending your children, you want to shoot them dead. I see that. That's not quite as relevant as the international war thing. I see that more likely to be the case. In this very humane country and in Britain, they allow you to be what's called a conscientious thing. If you're a Mennonite and your conscience really says to you, I don't want to take anybody else's life, they allow you that freedom to be a non-combatant. That's marvelous. In Germany, that's not so. The Jehovah's Witnesses, who, to a man, the JW, no, CB, JW, they believe in not fighting, and some of them died. The German government did not allow them to be conscientious objectors, interesting. But America does, which is still an amazing place to be for our freedom. Okay, here are some of the points that came to me as I wrote this. Theology of peace from an Anabaptist point of view. I started with this. A simple confession underlies this presentation of the theology of peace. A simple comment. I read the New Testament. I did. Again, my Church of England background is to go to church on Sunday and sing beautiful hymns in a building that had been there for 1,000 years, with the name of the clergy since 1066 almost. Isn't that amazing? Did I learn anything from the sermons? I wasn't listening. I don't remember thinking. Not one sermon. Maybe I wasn't listening. I have to tell this one. Till an American preacher. Here I'm in my private school called a public school in England. Public because these private fee-paying schools were open to the public, not local. Got it? So a public school in England means a private fee-paying school. Except there. So here we are, boarding school, all male, single sex. I'm against that. I think your system is better. So when you're 18 in that system, you go to college and this is something called a girl or a woman is there. What's this? No, I'm not able to interact with it. Perhaps that's a bad thing. Anyway, we're sitting there in our little grey suits, our little grey caps, our grey ties and grey shirts, Sunday after Sunday, and every morning for chapel, singing in the choir was very cool. Our pop music was Bach, still is. The Beatles came and said, fun. Very snobbish. But anyway, the preachers were, I guess, quite dull. We used to read from scriptures. We were a monitor in our house. We had to get up trembling, open a huge, big gold Bible and read from it. I remember having to read John 3:16. I got a clue on it. No idea. I had a theological thought about every 6 months. I thought that if I'm a good chap, I call this jolly good chap theology. If I don't kick the cat, if I'm polite to Aunt Bessie, then I'll go to heaven and play a harp on a pink cloud when I die. I thought about that about every 6 months. That was it. I'm different now. You could say, all right, you're a wacko, you're a fanatic. Okay, that's fine. The Bible, I find atomic. I find this quite fascinating. The Bible is extraordinary piece. So in there's a Jesus who is a Jew. Did you know that? Mary was a Jew. Did you know? Joseph is a Jew. And it wasn't Mr. and Mrs. Christ had baby, Jesus Christ. Do you see that? Christ is a very Jewish, messianic thing. If you're a Messiah, claim to be that, you want to rule the world, and I believe it. You see where my friend. I'm a naive believer. I believe Jesus is alive. I believe him. The opposite is to say Luke's a fraud, Paul was a liar. You see? The opposite is too difficult for me. Isn't that fascinating? I'm hooked. You won't talk me out of that easily. You can try. Anyway, so I'm bound then to say, what is this Messiah asking of? And having an admiral father who was very gentle with us, he wasn't tough. But we learned that to be a son, and this applies to the New Testament, to be a son, the ethics of being a son or daughter are as follows. To be a son or daughter, in biblical terms, you are to obey what mom and dad say. You're to make the one who bore you rejoice. Isn't that a good idea? I love that. What sort of a world we have if we can do this? Secondly, you are to learn dad's trade. Jesus said, I must be about my father's trade, not his business, my father. So you learn the dad's trade. That's what Jesus is learning. Watching God, and he's doing the trade, learning the trade. Thirdly, you go out to represent your father. You say, here I am, I'm representing my father, you talk to me, you're talking to God. In fact, I'm not God, but you're talking to me. He sends me out on a job, let's say his name is Jack, it isn't, whatever your name is. What is your name, sir? Ian. Scottish, Ian. E-I-A-N? Yeah. Wonderful. Scottish name. Scottish name. Okay, so he's Ian. All right, here I'm representing Ian. I'm Ian, but I'm not. Can you handle that? If you can handle that idea, you've understood the New Testament. Agency, brilliant. That's what Jesus is claiming. I'm uniquely representing God. So I, as a Christian, are listening to the ethics then. I'm compelled by the ethics of Jesus in regard to war. And I think it's difficult. I'm not pretending for a moment that what we're presenting here is straightforward or easy. I think it's difficult because of the need, to protect people and all that. I see the counter-arguments. But here we go on what I think maybe Jesus said. It's a simple confession. I read the New Testament. I was taken to a Get Saved meeting when I was 20. So I started on my background is nebulous, right? Oh, all right, I got the preacher. Okay. There turned up an American preacher one Sunday. American, from Illinois he was. Illinois, what's that? And his name was, God has a sense of humor, Reverend O'Hank. He must have been an Irish American, The Irish talk with a little lilt in the hot potato in the mouth, with a little lilt. His name was the Reverend O'Hank. Got up in this big pulpit, 600 boys sitting there Sunday by Sunday in a chapel that had been there for 400. In his private public school. And he got up in the pulpit and he said, Samson was a strong man. I was riveted. I'd never heard anybody speak like that. Now I hear them in Georgia all the time. Couldn't believe it. What a beautiful way to speak. Now then he said, Samson built an ice cream machine, and it had cogs and wheels and whistles and feathers. Then he said, did the machine work? No! This big American voice boomed down the chapel. 600 little boys in their gray suits. You got the picture? The point of the sermon, I have no idea. So in my experience, watch your children when you later have children. Watch them when they're in the teenage. Some of them fall for a serious cult. There are cults out there quite dangerous. And when I was 20, I fell for a cult. My wife was in it independently. She was a student, a married student. Not really allowed, but it happened. So that's me. Yes. But we fell for the cult. Why? Into the vacuum of my ignorance came the cult. The cult said, have you read the Ten Commandments, Anthony? Well, I couldn't have told you what they were. I knew there were some supposed to be important. What does the fourth one say? I hope I'm not treading on any SDA codes here, Seventh-day Adventist does. The fourth one says you have to rest on Saturday or die. You got it? That's on Saturday. It does. Fourth commandment. So this muggins here said, yes, I got it. My poor dad, mom, the oldest unmarried son, got lost to American Bible college, 19. Isn't that something? So watch your children. Train them. This was wrong. I now see. I was ignorant. I didn't know enough to see through that. And this turned out to be a horrible thing at the top. I mean, more or less free sex. We didn't know that. But it was immoral to the core. But we had the Sabbath, and you pagans were all meeting on Sunday. See that? That's the cover. The ethics of that were quite wrong. It was a cruel way to entice me. So I came out of that. Then we started all over again back in 1970. And our life and career has been a quest. And then we encountered our friend here, Professor Atrup, whose similar quest brought him to the same Bible college where we met. So we're on a quest, we're searching, hopefully doing better this time round. All right, the ethics of Jesus then, in regard to war. What does he say? Well, Bonhoeffer you've heard of. Bonhoeffer is the man who actually wound up trying to kill Hitler. Is that right? Trying to kill him. But was really a conscientious objector. Deep down, quite live up to his standards. He tried to kill Hitler. He started by saying, Jesus is simply uncompromising. Jesus says in Luke 6:46, this is the ethics of Jesus now. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and you will not do what I say? Very uncompromising. I was supposed to do what Jesus says, period, right? For your own benefit. You don't get that very clear in evangelicalism, but that's where it starts. So Bonhoeffer said, Jesus knows only one possibility, this is the top of my first page, simple surrender and obedience. Not interpreting, in quotes, the Sermon on the Mount, or, quote, applying it, but doing it and obeying. It's interesting. I think that's probably right. Very uncomfortable. That's the only way to hear his word. But again, he does not, Bonhoeffer says, I'm quoting him, he does not mean that it's to be discussed as an ideal, but simply to get on with it and do it, right? So then what did Jesus say about enemies? It appears to me that he's completely radical. And so I want to go over some pages and read only some of this. Start on page 3, at the last paragraph there. I want to give you now the words of a Roman Catholic priest who raised in his mind the question that we're dealing with here. In 1945, I'm quoting from this Roman Catholic, name was George Zabelka. And he said in 1945, Tinian Island was the largest airfield in the world. 3 planes a minute could take off from it around the clock. Many of these planes went to Japan with the express purpose of killing not one child or one civilian, but of slaughtering hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of children and civilians. And I, the Catholic priest, speaking, he said nothing. That's interesting. He didn't say anything. And he came to think, now, is this reasonable? And sooner or later, you have to sit and think through this. How does this work? As a chaplain, I often had to enter the world of the boys who were losing their minds because of something they did in the war. One man told me that he'd been on a low-level bombing mission, flying right down one of the main streets in the city, when straight ahead of him appeared a little boy in the middle of the street, looking up at the plane, childlike wonder. The man knew that in a few seconds the child would be burnt to death by napalm, which had already been released. Quite shocking. You know, we don't think about this very much. There's too much going on, but it's good to ponder it from time to time. The man knew that in a few seconds he would be napalmed. Yet I, the Roman Catholic priest, I never preached a single sermon against killing civilians or the men in it. I never even raised the subject. Silence, he said, in such matters, especially from a public body like the American bishops, is a stamp of approval. The facts are that 75,000 people were burnt to death in one evening of firebombing in Turkey. Hundreds of thousands were destroyed in Dresden, Hamburg, Coventry, that's in England, the cathedral, emaciated by bombs, obviously. The fact that 45,000 human beings were killed by one bomb over Nagasaki was new only to the extent that it was one bomb that did it. Isn't that interesting? I hate to spoil your afternoon, guys. I'm not trying to, but it's good, at least, if something fall asleep on that, ponder something, especially if you are Christian. Ponder. It's an amazing admission. He says, it seems a sign to me that 1,700 years of Christian terror and slaughter should arrive at August the 6th, 1945, when Catholics dropped the A-bomb on top of the largest and first Catholic city in Japan. One would have thought that I, speaking of himself as a Catholic priest, would have spoken out against the atomic bombing of nuns. Isn't that amazing? Here's a Catholic priest bombing the nuns or approving that. That's really shocking. So you see what I'm getting at. My major argument that I marshaled for my paper was Christians killing other Christians. I'm not sure that's going to work. It's rather shocking. Okay, so 3 orders of Catholic sisters were destroyed by a Roman Catholic bomb. Right. One would have thought that I would have suggested that as a minimal standard of Catholic morality, Catholics shouldn't bomb other Catholic children. I found that an interesting concept. Of course, the people at Bethany Seminary love this. They thrive on this sort of argument, because that's their conviction, right or wrong. That's the way to think. So he says then that I, like the Catholic pilot of the Nagasaki plane, which is called the Great Artiste, was heir to a Christianity which had for 1,700 years engaged in revenge, murder, torture, and the pursuit of power and prerogative violence, all in the name of the Lord. I pray God forgives us, and so on. Interesting concept. It's fascinating. Now, notice this, that your Methodist clergy and your Baptist clergy don't bear arms. Isn't that interesting? Do you know that? You don't ask your Methodist clergy to bear arms, because it's seen as obscene that the Methodist clergy, Lutheran clergy, will go and kill other Lutheran clergy, right? But wait a minute, take that a step further. Is it any better for Christians of those knowledge to kill each other? It might be that Jesus, the ethic of Jesus is peace. Radical and difficult as this is it, you let the wars get on with the war. I know that's hard. I don't think Jesus was running for president. I don't think he was. Check him out, that story. Huckabee was the one who said, Jesus wouldn't run for president. He could just be right. And so he took this view, or I think he possibly took this view, as a green card man. I'm a green card man. I'm not a citizen. Why would I bother filling out a post? Are you a citizen? Are you a citizen? She's become the real thing. They're very good to us. They don't pressure us to be citizens. I have got a green card, which is as old as the hills. I'm about 30 years old. Lasts forever. I'm a green card. It helps me theologically because I'm a residence alien. So what they do is what they do. You see the point? That's, I think, the New Testament. Jesus did not interfere with Rome. He got busy preaching his gospel of the kingdom, but he didn't exactly involve himself in trying to change Caesar. That might be that the Mennonites have a point. That might be a solution. All right, so then I'm on page 4 here. Injustice of the just war. You can tell me how you think just war. What is a just war? Is it a just war to drop an H-bomb on people? What do you do with that? Is that what's a just war? How does that work? Well, Augustine was the one who worked all that out. Luther solved it, if that's the right word, in this way. Luther wore two hats. He said, as a Christian, I don't get involved in that. But as a member of the state, I do. That's hard. Two hats. Two hats. I think that Jesus is a little bit more otherworldly than that. More like the Mennonite. So the just war, you can tell me what you learned from that. Did they write on the just war? Not yet. I'm looking at that. It's on the page. Circle just war. Then the scholar says this on the bottom of page 4. A primary kinship of the New Testament is not with the Gentile environment. Jesus is a Jew. Thinks like a Jew. Thinks like a Hebrew. But rather with the Jewish heritage environment. We have a trend, a tendency to be anti-Semitic. Do you know that Luther, brave man as he was, confronted the worst things of the Catholic Church, the indulgences, you know the story. Brave, and yet he said at the end of his life, those Jews are miserable people. Close the synagogues, stop the rabbis. He wrote a book called Gegen die Juden und ihre Lügen. Against the Jews and their lies. Georgia, their lies. I wouldn't recommend it. Anti-Semitism. People at Nuremberg, the trial, after Auschwitz and those awful events, said, well, I was only doing what Luther, there was some partial truth in that. I was only killing Jews. Did Luther add, well, yes, dangerous, but look at that Reformation. It's not the perfect thing. But Calvin was clearly very violent, and Luther was terribly anti-Semitic. So it may be that you and I have inherited an anti-Semitic tendency. Not a good idea since Jesus was a Jew, back to the Jewish Jew. Anyway, this man is saying the thinking of your Bible, your New Testament, is very much Hebrew-oriented. It isn't really concerned with Plato's philosophies and so on. That's a different environment. Okay. Then on page 6, I've got this here in the middle. One Lord John Fisher, the title gentleman in England, was asked to talk about the humanizing of war. Humanizing. Let's make war as human as we can. He said, what? You must be kidding. You might as well talk of the humanizing of hell. When a silly ASS in Britain, that's a harmless word, by the way. American mustn't say that. When a stupid person, when a silly blank, 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 I believe I would be careful. Like the word bloody, in England, you can't say that. Maybe you see My Fair Lady, she goes to the races and she says, not bloody Lord, that's common. You don't say that bloody, it's by Our Lady. It's very offensive. Americans get away with that, but so you have to be careful. Different culture. Anyway, some stupid person, he said. When a stupid person, I had parentheses from my prof here, brackets, the term is comparatively inoffensive in England. That awful word. At The Hague, got up and talked about the amenities of civilized warfare and putting your prisoners' feet in hot water and giving them gruel. My reply, I regret to say, was considered totally unfit for publication. As if war could be civilized. I'm in command when war breaks out. I shall issue my order. Essence of war is violence. Moderation is stupidity. Hit first, hit hard, and hit everyone. And I've known people who go to train to be in the army. And they go around with their guns, and they go, blood, blood, what is it? Blood makes the grass grow, right? Blood, blood, blood. I'm not sure that Jesus would do that. I have my doubts. Would he sign up for that sort? He's radical. He's embarrassingly radical. I see that. Okay. So then, other quotations. And I finished at the end with this idea. It may be that the only antidote to all this Constantinian stuff, when the church and the state got muddled up, Constantine's time onward, it might be that we should be a little bit separate. Jesus might say, church will constantly bring to mind the horror of what is even now still contemplated as a reasonable way of effecting a permanent peace. It must insist that plans to destroy the earth invite the wrath of God, not salvation. From the book of Revelation, God will destroy those who destroy the earth. It must urge believers to remember that Jesus said that Christians are not to be of this world, and since the world is in the power of the evil one, not to join hands. The state is supposedly, in the New Testament, Jesus' point of evil, under the control of principalities and powers. Those of you who are churchgoers have heard of all that. So, we have this massive number of stockpiled weapons. Rather scary. It's just frightening, the amount of power that's there. You as a Christian, if that's your ethic, you have to consider carefully, what are you going to do with that? Yeah, one other quotation I had in this book. I wrote a book on the Kingdom of God. Anybody, I'll give you a card. You want to write to me anything I've written, send you funds. Like, Father, can that. This is only my journey of getting a Bible and suffering a shock from which I'm still not recovering. I'm utterly shocked what I see there in the New Testament. I'm also very excited because he speaks. Prophets speak of a time coming when they're going to beat their swords into plowshares. You've read that. That's it. That's the vision of peace on earth. We ain't there yet. Time of trouble coming. It's known as the Great Tribulation. There's no pre-tribulation rapture. That's okay. There's a second coming. Messiah's coming to rule. If that's not the story, write to me and tell me this. Give me a better. That's the story. Jesus is Messiah, claiming to rule the world and inviting you to rule the world with him. It's an astonishingly practical story. Just like when you come to the university, you don't get the prize when you enter the building. You get your graduation certificate as you enter the building. That's right. I don't think so. Are you not being tried and tested? Don't we do that with everybody? You're being, in my Christianity, we'll do more of that tomorrow, you're being tried and tested for royal conclusion. You're going to fix the world like you ain't seen nothing yet. So what you do now, ethically, bears on what you're going to do. Do we want adulterers in that future government? I don't think so. Do we want murders in that? No, we're not. Okay, what are you going to be now? Sexual purity, very important. What a novel idea. Sex belongs in marriage. Oh, let's have a nest before we have any children. Oh, my goodness. That's radicalism. We're not there. We had more children aborted than born inside the park. That's not right. You're going to change that. You can do better than that. It's old-fashioned if you like, but it's actually rather simple. So I did have this quote. Finally, I'll finish with that. I don't want to bore you. You got the idea. Killing each other in war doesn't sound right. By this shall all men know that you're my disciples, Jesus said. You have love one for another. So killing each other in war seems to have gone awry. The international Israel of God in the New Testament seems to be an international brotherhood. And I've traveled enough to, I have enormous regard. I've been in Indonesia, in a big hotel, hidden away, because it was a threat from Muslims. There were Muslims becoming Christians there. Can you believe that? And they had to hide us in the back room in a hotel. Because if you become a Christian as a Muslim, you're likely to get killed by your family. I want to put a stop to that. Let's not do that. It's awful. So we have a long ways to go to get this international peace between all believers who have agreed not to kill each other. One who saw, I'll finish with this quote. This is on the last page. No, it's not. It's in my Kingdom book. Not right, you get one in the Kingdom book. Happy sitting. Just fun. Read bedtime reading and see what you think. The essence of New Testament Christianity. One who saw the inconsistency of Christians taking each other's lives, that was my major point, right, was an archdeacon in the Church of England. So he made my point, I think. When you write papers, don't you like the quotes you find? I always look at my papers, well, I've said it was not very interesting. Boy, these quotations that I found, powerful. He said this: within the Christian fellowship, each person is to be linked to each other by a love like that of Christ for each of the Christian fellowship. The ideal of love. That's the ethic of Jesus. Even Gandhi, the Indian said, you Christians are not doing what we in our Indian religion really believe. We believe in turning out the cheek. We Christians don't do that, believe me. At some point. That is, the new commandment. Obedience to it is to be evidence to the world of true discipleship. That's when you have love one for another, then the world will say, my goodness, we want to be like that. Listen, they won't kill each other. Isn't that marvelous? The whole of the rest of their ethics are so exemplary. They're not killing their babies. Say that. It's awful. And other things. Such is the quality of love designed, this man says, for the unity of its church. But can anything conflict more completely with such an ideal than that Christians should go to war against Christians? He was making my point. Is there a greater conflict than this ideal of international love, which we're going to have eventually, but we have to try to model that now, than the idea of us all killing each other? It actually makes no more sense than my coming to your house to kill you. You know, we're friends. That's absurd for Christians to be killing each other. That just doesn't sound right. Can anyone outside a madhouse, he said, suggest that when, for example, British and American Christians accepted responsibility of dropping the atomic bomb which killed and maimed in body and soul their fellow Christians at Nagasaki, can we imagine that such an act could be evidence, quote, to the world that within the Christian fellowship they were linked by a love like that of Christ for each other? It's a good point. I leave you with that point. You know, my wife has this cushion home, says to teach is to touch a life forever. You take some idea from this, ponder this, see how you go. If you're a Christian particularly, check to see that you're in line with the obedience to Messiah. Okay, finish with this. Finally, a little bit of history here before we get some reaction from you, if you wish. Back in 1945, the war ended. I was 5 years old in 1940, and that's when the war began. Dad was in the Navy, or we wouldn't know where he was. We were at home. This is how grim things became. Well, I was 5 years old, too young, I think, to be scared. Right? We had a Morrison shelter. This is a metal construction, about 6 feet long, 3 feet high. My brother and I, younger brother and I, my brother's a professional pianist, very musical, and we were put to bed in this thing. This was such that if the house fell down on you, because they sent those awful unmanned bombs, doodle bugs we call them, and they had a warning sign, a straight line. And that was the signal to hide. If we were out biking on our bikes, we would jump off our bikes and hurl ourselves in the ditch. I did it several times. And then came the all clear. I remember. And I'm now thinking, how utterly insane. I've been to Germany several times. Very hospitable, wonderfully clever people in theology. Wonderful. What is this insanity? That's just stupid. So that was the war, and Granny, that would be Nanny actually. Nanny in England was a resident person who helped mother look after the children, not grandmother, but might have included grandmother. Granny and Nanny were in the fireplace sleeping. Why? Because if the house falls down, the fireplace is a bit stronger. Isn't that something? My brother and I thought this was a riot. It was so exciting. Too young to be, I think, fairly scared by that. Finish with this. Do you know that Mother and Nanny were armed with shovels and rakes and garden forks to confront the Germans 22 miles across? Isn't that amazing? And of course it didn't happen. I think in the providence of God was spared. Churchill, my dad worked with Churchill in the War Office, a very obstinate, stubborn man, but very charismatic leader, who was spared. But that was my experience of war. So I'm coupling that early experience then with my exposure to Scripture over a career, pondering Greek and the Hebrew, looking at all that, trying to read everything I can, going to Bethany Seminary. I recommend the ethic of Jesus as being very radical, and I'm not unaware of the difficulties of this. To allow somebody else to do the killing, you see, that's a fair argument. But on the whole, I think Jesus stayed out. Might be interesting to you to talk to your Mennonite friends and see what they say about it. That's the ethic of Jesus in terms of war, as I understand it. Okay, it's enough of that. I haven't pressed you for the afternoon, but these are serious issues. What do you think, Professor? What else?
Let me throw out 3 or 4 of Augustine's theories.
Yes, please.
And then you and perhaps all of us can dive on. One of them is, we talked in the previous lecture about is war sometimes the lesser of two.
Yes.
One of Augustine's arguments is what if going to war gives you a better result than not going? It sounds a bit utilitarian.
It does sound good, and it has some force. My answer to that, of course, is the lesser of two evils is still evil. That is. You're supposed to do good. And if you can only do a lesser evil, that may not be quite good enough. You're supposed to do good all the time. Do good to everybody, including your enemy. The defensive sword of Peter was rebuked. Remember that? Peter gets out a sword, whacks the ear of the high priest. And Jesus said, put up that defensive sword. Don't you know that everybody who takes the sword will perish? I mean, it's dramatic stuff. You may have to die for this. And some of these Mennonites did. We covered that the other time. So I'm still not quite convinced that doing a lesser evil isn't still doing evil. That's the problem. It's a utilitarian argument.
It is utilitarian.
May not quite measure this fiercely uncompromising standard.
Another one would be, and I think Augustine probably would have yielded when it comes to atomic warfare, because he argues that just war can only be conducted by just means.
Yes, good point.
And I think from your point of view, the atomic bomb, say 45,000 civilians week, can be an unjust means, correct?
I think so, yes. And that John Stott, who was the Pope of Evangelicalism, now dead, very famous John Stott, he became a nuclear pacifist. He would have agreed to war in some just sense until it came to the massive indiscriminate. And my father was more or less that too. Dad had what's called graduated deterrence. His friends mocked him to graduated deterrence, what Dad was talking about. But graduated deterrence was the idea that you must deter with something that's realistic. If someone's going to invade your garden, you don't drop an H-bomb. It must be graduated in proportion to the attack. Well, that's become rather meaningless in the days of nuclear weapons. It's so massive, completely indiscriminate. I think if the world and the sadness of the world and killing doesn't break your heart, then boy, it's breaking your heart. As you get older, you get more sentimental. I see that. But when I read of Syrians killing Syrians, absolutely tragic. The death of one child today in Ukraine, Russia, whatever happened, or that insane person in some of your schools, that is a huge tragedy. It's absolutely insane. Or in China the other day, a railway station, saw that guy just guns down 25. I said this to people in Atlanta: one adultery per year in Atlanta is too much for God. See what I'm talking about? These ethics that you talk about are actually very sensible. But we're always in danger of letting the whole thing go down. Oh, so everybody does that. Oh, wait a minute. See where I'm going? I think you'll find that Jesus is uncompromising in his ethics. And in the long term, those might be really good ethics. Yeah, other points. I think for many of you guys, military, your father's a military person. Tell us about his struggles with this issue. Does he talk about fighting war?
He's never really taken a strong side either way.
Right.
Judging by things that he has said, I would say that he's more against it than for it, but maybe that has to do with the fact that he was such a part of it.
His career. Very brave to do all that, I see that. Yeah. Interesting subject. Part of your education. Just think about all of it. Anyway, that essay, the rest of it, if you want to glance at it sometime. My best effort in college to make my point. And I don't deal with this every day. I'm inadequate, especially I'm happy in other areas. But as I read these quotes again, I thought, church suicide must stop. So we'll finish with the text in Isaiah, which said they're going to beat their swords into plowshares. At your president's inauguration, Bertrand read that passage in Isaiah. It's also in Micah twice over. It's going to come to pass, a prediction, in the Acharita Yamim, that's the end times. You hear about how Lindsay and the boys all that. The Acharita Yamim, the final days, not the end of history, not the end of time. Can you imagine being beyond time? That's being done. The end of this particular phase, leading to the future age of the kingdom of God. You're reading Bishop Wright's translation of the New Testament. Eternal life actually means the life of the age to come. Now we're getting to clarity. Not eternal life. It is eternal life. It's faith. You're suffering for a lot of vagueness in church. You're not getting words defined well. So in the Acharita Yamim, in the final vista view that Isaiah had, it's going to come to pass. The nations go up to Jerusalem to learn a sane way to be. And they're going to beat their tanks into toys, into tractors. Sorry, their tractors. How's that go, Laura? Their tractors into. Nicely put. Anyway, yeah. Tractors into something into tractors. Right there you go. Tanks into tractors. Something like that. Wow, what a great idea! Can you imagine being able to do that with Iran now? Ahmadinejad, who said, "Wipe Israel off of it." I'm not sort of pro-Israel particularly. I mean, we're not politically involved particularly, but Israel still has a place in the plan. I'm going to wipe these people off the face of it. And you're president of that nation? Can you imagine how bad that is? Oh my goodness. Awful. So be peacemakers. You are, I'm sure. You are the absolute elite. You know the thing you're getting here? Marvelous. Setting up the light. And your children. Wonderful. But I think we've become responsible for things too. But you're getting insight into all sorts of marvelous things. Precious time that people study. The art of life, is to find a job that you love to do, to get somebody to pay you. So what do I really like to do? Okay, let's do that. Let me get somebody to pay me to do it. Isn't that good? I certainly can say that we've enjoyed that. My wife's a master gardener. We live on 35 acres of Georgia forest. Nobody's ever been there, except Indian Flintstone. They shot deer before we got there. We built a house on. She's a master gardener, teaches garden. She writes books to theology. And that's 35 acres of a slice of Eden with a stream, a creek, quite broad, going down with waterfall. Never stops. Spring fed, water, rock, solid rock. All these biblical symbols, rock. It's beautiful. Quite gorgeous. America is an amazing place. And yet, fearful in some other ways. Anyway, that's my thought for the day. Anything else you'd like to say? Come on, react. Say something radical. I'm stultified, right? The other classes are rather the same, shocked. But this is conscience objective stuff. Please, please.
Back to that. Jesus, yes. The best thing to do, said the lesser two evils is to do nothing. That's kind of what I'm struggling with.
Yes, no, I agree on that. The word would be struggle. To do nothing. If that, you have to find what to do nothing would imply, though, that you actually get busy killing. That's the problem. Then you're faced with simply this. Augustine struggled with this. Can you love your enemy and kill him? That's really what you have to think about. All right, you just shot the guy who comes in. You're big on guns here. We don't do guns quite like here. That's fine. That's another issue. Okay, so the guy comes into your house and you shoot him. He's on the ground with the blood coming out of his ears. If you're taking your Christian ethics seriously, you have to try to say, did I really love him? I'm not sure. So the do nothing hides a little bit, doesn't it? Do nothing. Yeah, but what is do nothing? The opposite of that is do something, which is killing him. That's
what's to do nothing? Just let him come in and steal your stuff, break your family. That's what I'm looking at, but not responding to.
Exactly. In question, then the alternative. If you don't do that, then you're going to take a gun and kill him. That's where it's tricky. Now, I would certainly try to wrestle into the ground. I would be violent to that extent. Like with a suicidal person who's trying to jump out of the window, I try to stop it. I don't have a gun, so I'm being a bit,
What about sacrificing yourself for your family?
Or the kind of look at the Les Miserables response.
Yeah. Yeah. It's difficult. I think this is a difficult topic. My impression from Jesus is that that's the way he does it. But you think of it. Dad was very sympathetic at this point. A passionate man.
Anthony, you want to mention the
book?
Two books.
Oh, yes. Charles Freeman, the 381, Heretics, Pagans, and the Dawn of the Monotheistic State. Yeah, that one speaks of a different subject, more how they developed this Trinitarian idea that God is 3 in 1, but 1 and 3, mystery and all that. It tended to be under the influence of a lot of Greek philosophy, which is well known. If you want to study that, you look at Harnack, the famous church historian. And this man shows the rather hooligan-like approach to life that was involved in giving you a lot of the things you believe in church. That way. This one is most interesting. Jesus was Philip Jenkins. Our 4 patriarchs, as are church fathers, 3 queens, 2 emperors, decided what Christians should believe for 1,500 years. There's some truth. A lot of what you're getting is uncritically accepted. I don't know why we ever came across it. The Bible shocked me into thinking, I'm not sure this is quite right. We've got Paul saying, I wish above all things that you be totally united in one mind, same judgment. Now we've got 30,000 denominations. Let me give extreme examples. You've got people who are arguing about the size of your mustache. I'm making my most extreme example. You've got little old ladies who are appalled that I would have a glass of wine and drink strictly moderate. If your dad was an alcoholic coming home beating him, I understand why you ate alcohol. I understand that. But Jesus was normal. You go to Europe and say, oh, the Christian doesn't do some filthy stuff. But moderate use of alcohol was normal. Oh, then Georgia touched the bottle. But I don't care about drink. That's moderate. I'm talking about strict moderation. It's normality for Jesus. Can we get that right? Why not? You have wine in your community. Of course it is. It's not a problem. You can go to the feast and the others are told to drink and rejoice with it. It's be normal. Drunk? No. Isn't that interesting? It's the principles of God. Think, because you are the creators of, thinking. You're the thinking populace. Praise God. Great comments. Anything else? About anything to do with the ethics. Yes, sir.
So when does religion kind of start to make the back burner in the UK?
Oh, that's a great question. More recently, from the 60s, I would say. In my day, most people went to church on Sunday. I don't think they learned very much, but we sang beautiful hymns. And it was a Sunday routine, and we went home and had Yorkshire pudding, and lamb for lunch on Sunday. We went to church. We did communion. I don't remember a thing I learned there. I wasn't listening, but you find out. Brits don't care. Now, funnily enough, the murder rate in England is very tiny, In my childhood, the policeman was armed with a little stick, a little truncheon, and a bicycle. And he rode his bike up and down the village. Now they're armed. They weren't armed. Did you know that? So very recently, not all of them are armed now. So England actually has a rather low divorce rate, rather low murder rate, but they don't care about church. Now here's a really bad statistic, and that is that it's said, I don't know, I would say it's true, that in Georgia, if you join the evangelical Bible-believing church, you're slightly less likely to get divorced than otherwise, about 51 to 50. And I say, wait a minute, sure, I don't think this works. Close down, go home, read your Bible, let's start again. Let's go back and see, where did we get this wrong? I don't think we got it quite right. If your Christianity, if you're claiming to be Christian, doesn't radically change you, demonstrably change, I think it might not be worth it. That's something for now. Anything else? Yeah, it's great. I think, is that right, Brian, around the 60s?
Yeah. Do you have an opinion on the death penalty and how this might?
For me, I'm pumping out and saying that's what the government's going to do. Paul speaks about the government being empowered with the soul. I don't think he's saying to the Christians, you get involved with that. It's a very cop-out approach. Resident alien. You don't ask me to fight American wars, you see that? I'm not of that system. I'm a resident alien, living in a foreign land, looking for the kingdom of God. Then I'll do whatever I have to do. But right now, I'm looking at that as something others do. It's a cop-out way I see that, and it opens itself to that argument as cop-out. But as far as I can see, Jesus is super radical, loving your enemies and loving fellow Christians across the international border. I think so. Yeah, the death penalty, I don't know. You can argue about whether it deterrs or not. Certainly, if you take the Old Testament, as you can, because you can take the Old Testament, you're going to have to kill children who are rebellious, right? You're going to have to stone all fornicators right up. That's a Mosaic thing. They did that. Very tough. Jesus is not advocating that. Under the New Covenant, it's a different thing. So I don't know. We do have the death penalty, I suppose. I really don't. I'm not terribly politically involved. I do watch Fox News, I watch CNN, I like Fox News, I like Megyn Kelly, she's a lawyer. See the way she gets to the point? She's a smart person. She nails those people down. That's the art of good dialogue, by the way. Get to the point. When you argue, be it theology or anything, people dodge, right? You ask them the question. Like tomorrow night, we're going to say, talk about the creed of Jesus, Mark 12. What's that creed? Whoa. That's an interesting question. Ask your pastor. Jesus said the greatest command is tomorrow night. Greatest command ever is the Lord our God is one Lord. What's that creed? Is that a Trinitarian creed or Unitarian? Get that conversation going. It's interesting. You're the guys that get conversations going, to use the Fox News. Get that out on. Here's more. Stir people into thinking about Jesus and these great issues. It's fun. It's fun. Anyway, thank you for being so sweet and patient. Nobody's threatening with a gun or anything. This lady over here is even smiling. What are you fixing to do? That's my joy.
What am I fixing?
Yeah, fixing to be.
Oh, I don't know. I'm leaning towards speech therapy right
Speech
now.
therapy.
But yeah, you're just talking about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I was leaning towards. I want to work with elderly people, so that's.
Is that speech therapy or is that a different
You can
scale?
work with them at the nursing homes whenever they have trouble.
Strokes.
Yeah.
Speech
Whenever they're
therapy.
stressed.
You're a caregiver. You have a compassion heart. One, you all do, but I'm a compassion heart. That's wonderful. Lord Montgomery was a famous general in the Second World War. I was 18 years old. Went to some cocktail party in Norway. My parents were traveling. Terribly nervous. I survived very well. But I was introduced to Lord Montgomery Ballymake, and he talked like a machine gun. He said, "Youth, young man, what are you going to do when you grow up?" I said, "Sir, I really don't know. Not sure." "Yeah, that's the problem with the world you guys are." He really went for me. I didn't go for it. He said, "I'm not quite sure." That's great. Got time. You find out what you are gifted to do. What talent have you got that God did not give you? You take the talent that God has given you. You say, "What can I do to benefit humanity?" And I enjoy doing it. You get something to pay for. And you make a very careful choice with your mate. Very careful. Get a little advice from your parents. A little advice. And if they all say, "Don't do it," you might think of it. You might. Isn't that interesting? Looking back on life, I see how it is. We've been married for 42 years. But divorce is
It makes me naturally inquisitive about what was this about the instructor not marrying students and so forth, and how did that play out?
We were in the Bible, in a very fundamentalist Bible college. You had to get permission to hold hands. I'm against that. We had to get permission from the boss to hold hands. That's, I think, overdoing it. I wouldn't do that any more than I would think Amish people should not have electricity and pretend they don't and do that. That's just honest. No, the good life, the ambassadorial life, was supposed to be, as Christians, normal citizens, able to mix and mingle with everybody, talk to everybody, not condemn them, but challenge them here and there. So speech therapy, I often wished I'd done some of that. To be able to enable somebody to speak clearly is one.
It's a lot of school.
Law school. That must be a very thorough training. That's great. When you enable a stutterer to, like Bertie in the film. Have you seen the movie King's Speech? You should see that. It is a brilliant piece of film. And it's exactly your field.
Extremely well awarded.
Oh, they want everything possible. But it's your field. Because this is an Australian actor doing a speech therapist on Bertie. It's not only very funny, but it's very human. You should definitely see that. I've known nothing about that. So, other people, what other incredible careers are before us here? Anybody president of USA? Maybe?
Or of USI.
USI? What are you going to do, sir?
I want to go into medicine, specifically cardiothoracic surgery.
Which sort of thing?
Heart surgery.
Use a long word. Completely. Say that word again?
Cardiothoracic.
Oh. Okay, now my Greek is coming in nicely. Yeah, heart and thoracic, the chest. Yeah. That's amazing what they do these days. I think my father would have lived beyond 69. They didn't have the techniques of bypass. Isn't that amazing what they do? And you're skilled with your hand. You would work and all that stuff well.
Yeah, I do. Mostly metal work, though.
You take your talent. I'm in the music world, so I have an oboe friend. She's the English horn player. That's what we call a cor anglais in England. They call English horn. It's the alto oboe thing. She's in Alabama, and she's the English horn player in the Alabama Symphony. She's about the only one that can adjust my European instrument. It gets cold, it's horrible. So I go and talk to her. When she was 7, somebody gave her an oboe. She stripped it right down and put it together. Talent. I got to tell you this talent story. No, I'll shut up. I love talent. Talent is so interesting. I was teaching oboe for a short time in England as a peripatetic teacher. That's a long word, wandering around. My brother used to say, yes, it's a very pathetic teacher. Peripatetic. And so you begin the school year with your new group of oboists, and you handle this with excruciatingly difficult technique when you play it. Right? And it's ghastly, like learning a violin. It's just torture. You hand these oboes out, you get them to read. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. One kid picked the instrument up and seemed to know how to play it. I said, your parents are obviously oboists. No music in the family. Very interesting. Reigate Girls Grammar School, about 1960. It's 1960. 30 years later, I went back to London, to the Oboe Centre, and on the wall was a wind quintet. And there she was, Christine Peplow. That's talent. So you sit down and say, what am I really good at? What is my talent? Let me use this to develop that talent. You're doing it. So the story ended with this, that when Mr. Prévin, famous French conductor, arrived in London to conduct the New World Symphony. You know the tune. Ta-da-dum, ta-da-dee, ta-da-da. It's an English horn solo. Every English horn player lives that. And he was rehearsing this with the Philharmonia Orchestra. He stopped the rehearsals. Isn't that interesting? That's talent. So you figure out, what is my talent? And then you develop that talent. Not only yourself, maybe servicing people. That'll work. Then you'll be happy doing what you are naturally good at. Is that right? Something like that works. I've had fun with it, with the Bible. I love doing Bible stuff. I can read it for hours and find it intensely interesting. He does too. A good resource for you guys. By the way, private conversation with him, he's an expert in this. Okay, how are we doing for time?
3 or 4 minutes.
Goodness, this has been very exciting. This is we had to fight the elements to get here, you know that. We were going to drive here yesterday, and they had all these alarming things about it's icy on the roads, and Barbara, we're terrified. Although we had a big freeze in Atlantic, saw that, all the power went out. But we didn't manage that, and suddenly this man is on the phone late last night saying, oh, I'll come down and drive you up here. I didn't have to find his apartment. He drove on roads which were much clearer. This is America. He swept those roads. No, nothing. Come on. This is America. When they built our house on a rock, they were going to do the side of the house, new house, no house had ever been there before, and they were breaking the teeth of the bulldozer on the rock. No problem. Over to Alabama, 204 sticks of dynamite. They went. Barbara and I then learned out with a pry bar how to make a wall out there. Yes. Isn't that amazing? It's a wonderful world, some say. Okay.
We might take you up if 3 or 4 would like to go to Georgia sometime. We might actually take you. I've been